Hello, this is September 6, 2013, and you're tuning in for the regular Friday evening webcast with Mr. Lyndon LaRouche. I'm Jason Ross. I'll be moderating this evening, and I'll be joined in the studio here by Benjamin Deniston. We'll be posing some questions to Mr. LaRouche. To start with, Mr. LaRouche has asked to begin with a question we've got from one of our Washington, D.C. political associates. The question comes in. Mr. LaRouche, we have received reports that there was a face-to-face discussion in St. Petersburg between Presidents Putin and Obama, and that it is clear that the only option for Syria is convening of a Geneva II conference to reach a ceasefire and a political solution. Your own warnings that any military action could lead to nuclear war have resonated. There is clearly an institutional consensus here in the United States involving the vast majority of American citizens, the military, and other institutions, that a political solution is urgently needed. Could you please give us your notion of how such a Geneva II process and a political solution could be formulated? Your input at this critical moment on the eve of Congress returning to Washington is most appreciated and needed.
We're on the edge of a general breakdown crisis of the economy of most of the world, particularly in Europe, between Europe, the transatlantic region, into the United States and so forth is most notable. In fact, there is, in terms of Wall Street, there is no chance that Wall Street could actually survive in the coming months over that course of time, because they're intrinsically bankrupt, and any further collapse of the economy in general will be also multiplied as a collapse in the Wall Street organization. It's obvious that the intention of the higher Wall Street ranks, like those of the British Empire, is that they are planning to cancel most of the debt of the United States and other nations now, and that will mean reduce the whole thing to a very small fraction of the people that are being carried on the books at this time. So that's where we stand generally. Now, and so therefore a lot of lies on the part of Wall Street. Liars, I guess they're very good at lying. They've become a specialist in that. But the point is there's no way that we can, under the present conditions and direction, could sustain Wall Street. We couldn't. Unless Wall Street were to reduce its own size with its own version of a call-in, a bail-in. So they could bail in a whole bunch of their friends and neighbors up there. And that's what the situation is. So the problem is far different than it might appear to be on the surface in terms of what newspapers and others are saying today. So therefore we have to take an entirely different view of the matter than is put apparent in the newspapers and whatnot. This thing cannot survive, and if they're going to, and what this coincides with is the Queen of England. The Queen of England is operating on the assumption that under her regime, she is going to bring about a reduction of the human population from 7 billion people to 1 or less. She's committed to that. She has the machinery in motion to do exactly that, which means there's a general intention to reduce the population of the planet massively. And this is already in process in Europe, it's in process in the United States, and in process elsewhere. For example, we don't even have enough food supplies to meet our needs of our own people going through this winter season. We don't have the food supplies. They instead they turn food into gasoline or the equivalent. And that, as a result of that, you have people who are going to starve during this winter season. That's the reality. So, but for political reasons, the motion is to try to pretend that everything is going to be normal, plus a few changes in law. But that will not work. The more likely case is that Wall Street will be forced to go bankrupt, because they're already on that stage now. There's no way of avoiding it. But that will mean that things are going to change rapidly, and unless we have a completely new approach to things, instead of what's going now, this system is going to crash in the worst possible way. There's no way that humanity can get by this thing safely through the first of the year under the present conditions. However, on the contrary side, the factor is that if we put Glass-Steagall into play properly as we've intended to do so, we can solve this problem, except for the shortage of food, rather nicely. And that's exactly what we intend to do. So therefore, the answer is, if we succeed in pushing Glass-Steagall through successfully, then the nation will survive. If we're not successful in doing that, the nation will not survive. Not, at least not as we have known it up here before. So that's the thing. We've got an alternative. You pick off Glass-Steagall, support it, and the nation can survive. If you don't, if you want to stick to the old Wall Street system, well, most of your Wall Street comrades will die anyway, of hunger or whatever they die of. And the situation of the people in the United States will be miserable.
Lynn, directly on this, Lynn, we have a question on the fight for Glass-Steagall, because there was a hope from some of these Wall Street factions that the Glass-Steagall momentum would die down in the Congress when they were out of session, but it has not. The momentum and fight for Glass-Steagall has continued to build while Congress is out of session, and now there's a fight around putting Larry Summers in as the chairman of the Federal Reserve. And so the question is, what is your response around this fight to try and push in Larry Summers in the middle of this fight, who was obviously one of the main opponents to the entire Glass-Steagall program? And given the significance of the Glass-Steagall fight, what's your response to the attempt to ram Summers in at this point now?
This involves the question of Obama. Because, in my view, Obama is not sustainable. And he probably is going to end up dumped. He's setting himself up to be dumped. That we call that impeachment. We'll take the fuzz off the impeachment. Right? And so the question is, what are we going to do? We're going to have to actually, in my view, we have to succeed in putting through Glass-Steagall. Without that, you're going to get chaos in the nation and the world. There are no solutions at that point. In other words, there are no solutions which based on continuing the Obama administration or continuing Glass-Steagall. I mean, continuing the gangsters we have out there. So there's no chance. We have a solution. There is no other solution. Glass-Steagall being restored, we can save this nation. We can come out of this alive. This will mean that Wall Street will be largely closed down, almost totally closed down. We have no need for Wall Street. Wall Street does not produce anything that the people of the United States require, except maybe the Wall Street clowns themselves. So therefore, we can be optimistic because we have the only actual solution on hand. Not because we were hit by a stroke of genius, but because the facts show it. If you cancel Wall Street, and treat Wall Street as it should be treated, and cancel it, then we don't have a big bill to pay anymore. The costs of living will drop. The income of Wall Street will drop tremendously. But we then will go back to the Glass-Steagall system, and under the Glass-Steagall system, with the addition of a national policy on funding, reserves, we can get out of this thing quite well. In other words, we do have the chance. The problem we have is the forces, the gangster forces and similar things, represented by Wall Street and its British extension. This is where the problem lies. If we got rid of that burden and say we're going to put the system through reorganization, go back to Glass-Steagall, and create a federal credit system which will help us to get new investments going into place, productive investments, we can make it. That's the best shot we have. And everything else I see as an alternative isn't going to work. We have to be concerned also, however, with the world at large. we're getting through into a period where we could have thermonuclear war easily. It can come from many kinds of directions, because the shortages and the hysteria, so forth, all these things lend themselves to bring us to the end of some kind of terrible condition in the world. So therefore, that being taken into account, I would say, if we get Glass-Steagall through, and if we create a credit system to maintain our system of functioning, by extending federal credit under federal control to support necessary things which will contribute to the welfare of the population, create new employment, create growth in general. This is what we have. And only a fantasy would assume that there's anything else out there to have. There is nothing else but that. The question is, how insane are the people who are in political control positions inside the United States and Europe? That's what the question is. If their insanity prevails, and all their ideas are insane at this point, then we don't have anything. Mankind has nothing except terrible problems. If we do the other, if we put through Glass-Steagall and back up Glass-Steagall with a federal credit system, a federal government-controlled credit system, where we put out money on loan through the credit system to employ people and to produce things. Therefore, we can, on that basis, know we're going to proceed with a kind of recovery program which will resemble in some respect what Franklin Roosevelt did, a similar kind of program. It also means that we will be able to influence positively the situation in Europe, the situation in other parts of the world. And also, we have before our hands right now, we have a wonderful opportunity, which will probably come up in discussion, questions here today, later.
Well, I know Jason definitely has a couple questions on this opportunity, but I think before we get to that, we have to, I think a lot of people are wondering about this Obama question, because you've said some very provocative things, and we have one question in here I'd like to read. You have suggested in recent discussions that Obama is on his way down, and you've even raised the possibility that the entire Syria operation could be part of a setup in that operation. Can you explain your thinking on this? Clearly, as far back as 2008, 2009, you uniquely and very loudly declared this man has a narcissistic personality, and this is defining this presidency. But can you expand upon your assessment now?
Yes, first of all, I'm not an amateur. And I generally know what I'm doing because I'm a professional in this business. I've been an expert in forecasting, and there's no magic in forecasting. There are principles involved. And we know what happens. Now, what we're dealing with is a situation where you have to dump this president. He is becoming increasingly unpopular. He's making terrible mistakes all the time, one after the other. He's ripe to be dumped. And the best thing that could happen would be to dump him immediately. He is actually, in my view, immediately impeachable. And I think that the impeachment of this president should be one of the things that come up on the discussions which are now about to begin in Washington. When Congress comes back to meet, the first thing on the agenda, or at least on the minds of people, should be, why do we impeach this bum? He's guilty as hell. Just impeach him. Change the subject. People will have a fresh view of things. And whatever we can do quickly, we can actually probably work our way through. It does mean we have to clean out down. Wall Street's going to have to take a burn. They're going to have to take a fall. Huh? And there'll be things like that. But we can do it. And I think there's no alternative except that. This is just plain fact. There's nothing that we can do. I know what can be done. I know what will happen. I think first of all, I think Obama is already marked for dumping. On top, not only is he worthless to anyone, he's worthless to the United States. He's worthless to anyone I can think of. Maybe the British Queen likes him. But he's a useless tool. He's only making trouble. He's stupid. He doesn't know what he's talking about most of the time. And he's, double talking all the rest of the time. So I think the point is we are in a situation where you can't talk about solutions unless this guy is dumped or put under restraint in some other way. But he's got to be taken off the shelf. No longer is he marketable. And that's where we stand. And this crazy Summers is a clown. I don't see how he can make it. He's despised in Harvard, where he was housed. He's despised by most people in the United States already for many years. Why should somebody want to put that guy in? I think this guy, the suggestion of Summers, is just one more reason to dump the president. If he's proposing Summers, and he's already a bum, that is, the president is, then I think probably both of them, Summers and the president, should probably go out together.
Well, impeaching Obama certainly would be a much better thing for the Congress to do when they first come back than debating the guilt of Bashar Assad. Obama's guilt should be rather well known to them. So there's a couple of questions that have come in via email about a report that was just released. This is the cover of it, from 21st Century Science and Technology on the nuclear Nawapa 21. This is I don't want to get into a long explanation of it. You should read the report, and I'd like to ask you about it. The question that came in is that your science team has just completed a vital study on the thermonuclear Nawapa, the Bering Straits projects, and other great projects to transform the Trans-Pacific region and the world as a whole. Please give us an idea, Mr. LaRouche, of the mission that you have defined for your team of young scientists.
Okay. Well, you should observe that, especially in the United States, there has been no progress except collapse, if you like that as a progress, in the United States. So there is no perspective. There are no programs out there which will actually restore the economy and restore growth. Particularly, we've fallen way behind in terms of maintaining any kind of economy, physical economy. We haven't done much of anything since, some presidents have been out of business in that time. Like John F. Kennedy, he's been out of business. And when he left office, since that time, the actual net rate of growth in the U.S. economy has been negative. And what you're seeing today and feeling today is the effects of a long term of sliding down into the pit, the economic pit. We've now reached as about close to bottom as we can take it. So therefore, if you come across with a program which actually generates productivity, you can use a credit system based on the good faith and promising perspectives. We can create a system which will take major improvements in the world system, and this will enable us to go on something which is comparable to what Franklin Roosevelt did in 1933 and beyond, when you take a program which gets people back to work right away. The program is not really too productive because the people aren't too skilled and so forth and these kinds of things. But, as Roosevelt showed and demonstrated, if you start that and you build up, the first thing is the morale of our people. We have people that are on the streets or not even on the streets. We have young people who have no hope. We have many people who used to have hope, have no more. Look at what happened in Detroit. Thievery, outright thievery, is an official policy of the U.S. government in Detroit. So what we're doing is we're destroying our people. We're demoralizing them. And the first thing you have to do if you're going to start something, you have to remoralize your own people, our people. And we have young youth people. They have no future, none. How are you going to build an economy to restore confidence if you don't have a future for your people? If you have many of our young people are insane, they're clinically insane because of the kinds of circumstances under which they live. Now, Roosevelt understood that. It's worse now than it was under Roosevelt in this terms. But what Roosevelt did was to restore the confidence of the people, the young people, the older people, so forth. And by doing that in the first year or two, which is what he was doing most of the time, he began to build up a process which took off and began to give you real productive programs, real growth, real development. And this hit as we went along, and we emerged, until Roosevelt died, we were on a course which would have changed the world in a way which everyone would think was beautiful. Roosevelt had agreements with all kinds of people and all kinds of institutions and nations. The people of the world respected Roosevelt because of what he had accomplished, because of his policies themselves, which are attractive to them. And that's the way we'll have to go now. We'll have to walk in the footsteps of Roosevelt. We'll also have to launch major programs, including high-energy flux density programs. Otherwise, we can't make it. So therefore, what we're doing out of the basement operation is we created a combination of things which, if they're carried through as policies of our government and policies of cooperation with other governments, we can successfully get the United States and the world back in a condition. We can do that. And that's what we have to do. It means we're going to have to, but the problem we're going to have is the greenies, the people with this green ideology. Though, as long as the green ideology controls the policy of the United States, the people of the United States are doomed. And the same thing is true pretty much in Europe. If that green policy continues, they're doomed. The nations are doomed. Now, this is not just a coincidence. The Queen herself, Queen Elizabeth II, who has demanded that the human population be reduced from 7 billion to 1 billion at a rapid rate. She is actually carrying out that policy. This means mass murder of the human population on the basis we have to save civilization by killing, all but 14% of the population. And that's the factor we have to take into account. We have to say, okay, no more. No more. If the Queen has to be thrown out, she has to be thrown out. Because we cannot have this program that she has of reducing the world population rapidly from 7 billion people to 1. And that's her program. That's also implicitly the program of Obama. But I think he's a little muddle-headed about this. His brains don't work too well. They actually never did, but it just became more obviously recently.
Some would say that was a key prerequisite for his occupation of the presidency. No, I've got a follow-up question on that about, well, the Greens. I mean, if your goal of your society is to go extinct and to have no impact on the earth and to not exist, it makes it very hard to progress if you're trying not to exist at all. That's not a very worthwhile goal to have. I suggest people drop it. So I've got a question for you about the networks that we're going to need to get the assistance of to really push this project forward. So we've got a lot of people in our country that have been trained in universities. For example, we've got engineers, hydrologists, we have people active in the fusion research community, people who are experts in transportation, maglev technology, etc. How do you see the process of pulling such people into the pioneering work of this objective that you're laying out? How are we going to engage these layers?
Well, it takes a credit system. Everything that I base myself on is based on the concept of a credit system. And that's Alexander Hamilton's credit system, for example. The United States would not have survived its opening organization as a nation state but for Alexander Hamilton did with the credit system. And the only way we ever, what President Lincoln did in the Civil War. used a credit system, the greenback system. It's a credit system. It worked. So therefore, the characteristic of the United States from the beginning, including the Massachusetts Bay Colony, was always based on the credit system. We go back to a credit system as opposed to a monetarist system, which is our original Constitution. We don't have to change anything except change back to what our Constitution designates. We are a constitutional system. We are a credit system institution, a credit system economy. And if we use that principle of getting people to work, getting them to produce, and passing on to one another group, like farmers to machinists and so forth, they work together because their economy is, the sub-economy each is tantamount to the other in terms of its relationship. So therefore, if we go back to that kind of approach, which is what Lincoln used to get us alive out of the Civil War, and what was done to give us the United States as an active nation in the first place, if we go back to that policy of a credit system based on that, our performance will be good. The question is the quantity of performance that's involved. Will we get enough credit system? Now, I think what's happened with the proposals for the Trans-Pacific area is typical. If we go to a thermonuclear fusion system of power in the Pacific Ocean region and beyond, we can generate rapidly a combination of development programs which will be the greatest thing that mankind has ever heard. It's all potential. It's all based. We have not done anything recently to speak of in terms of developing the economy of the United States. That sort of ended with the assassination of John F. Kennedy. But if we go back to the thermonuclear fusion, which is absolutely necessary to do the job, we can very quickly turn this situation around in the world. By quickly, I mean we have to allow that a year or two at least is going to be required to just reorganize things and bring some order into things before we really begin to grow again. So therefore, the growing of the population, of the economy for the population, is crucial. But once we have done that, say the first 2 years of a new presidency, for example, by replacing the bum in there or now, that kind of program can work. Also, we can actually, China is in a dangerous situation, but China can be stabilized. And this kind of program, interacting with the United States, will help to do that, solve that problem. And we have also Japan is interested in this thing. We have other parts of the world which are not as broken down, relatively speaking, as our European or the Atlantic nations. So there are solutions. My essential view is optimism with caution. And the caution is you've got to get this president out. You'll never solve anything. Well, he can be dumped. He's violated enough things to be thrown out of office. And we have to change the policies of a lot of things. We have to shut down Wall Street. We cannot afford Wall Street owes us too much money. They can never pay it. So one thing we're going to do with Wall Street on the crowd, we're going to pull them into account that they're going to go on an honest money basis. They're not going to get fake credit as they've been doing recently. They're not going to steal as they've been doing recently. So we have all the potential of doing something, and if we take the experience that Franklin Roosevelt had in the 1930s Depression, we as a nation have a heritage, and that heritage is one that works. It worked for the original United States. It worked for the in earlier periods, and it will work now. Will it be good enough? I don't know. But it's the best shot we have.
Well, I'd like to ask you one more about the credit system, about the credit system outlook, actually. Because you've stressed in your writings and your presentations that credit isn't a monetary arrangement, that the credit system isn't a different way of dealing with money, and that it's almost it's as much an outlook or direction as it is the policies that you might use to bring that about. I wanted to ask you what you could say about what role society plays in fostering that cultural outlook in people. What's the connection of culture and credit?
Well, they are almost the same thing. Now, what we have to do is simply understand what the principles are, which the United States has almost lost, and Europe too, have almost lost memory of what the principles are. The principles are a credit system, not a monetarist system. In other words, the monetary system, somebody puts out paper money, or the similar thing as paper money. They say, now you can use our money, our paper money, and you can go into debt to use that money. And that creates the usual monster we get as a result. That's how the depression cycles and so forth occur. If you, on the other hand, have operating on a credit system, what you do is you look at what the productive powers are and how they are organized in the nation. For example, it used to be farmers would have one period where they would be doing the work and not getting much income from it. Until they harvested it, they couldn't realize the benefits. But once they'd harvested it, the thing changed, because now you get the other forms of productive employment, and they cut in. And that was what was done by Alexander Hamilton. You had a cyclic system where every part made a contribution to the system, and every part participated in the contribution to the system. If we go back to that system, which we'd used in the Civil War, for example, we used by Roosevelt in order to organize a recovery from a deep depression, a deep and prolonged depression. We use the same method, then take into account the kinds of technologies which are going to be applied to this principle, and we are going to say, well, the first thing we're going to do is what we've discussed, is we're going to actually take the Pacific region, the whole Pacific region, from the Bering Straits and the Arctic down all the way through. We're going to use thermonuclear fusion as a driving force in this process, the commanding driving force, and we shall do just fine. The question is, will we do really enough fine? But we have the United States and most of Europe has had no technological progress in the economies since when? Since actually the death of Kennedy, of John F. Kennedy. We went into a new decline in the U.S. economy from the assassination of Kennedy on down. And the Vietnam War was one of the big draggers which dragged us down. But if we don't get into that kind of mess, and we go along with the principles of the United States Constitution, because we have the U.S. Constitution, all we have to do is get the bums out who are jamming the works. In that case, we can go to recovery. The question is, will it be a big enough effort to actually have a net result that we require? So it's what the people do. We can make the proposal as candidates for this and candidates for that. We can make the proposal. The question is, will the people buy it? Will they respond to it? Will they accept it? And I think they will, if we do it right. But I don't think we have a case where we have to do the kinds of things and impose suffering that Wall Street wants us to do or the British want us to do. We don't have to kill people. We don't have to stab them to death. We don't have to drug them to death. We can get them back, as Roosevelt did in the 1930s.
So yeah, one final question for you here. Given the return of the Congress coming up this next week, it was 1 year ago this Sunday, September 8th, 2012, at your 90th birthday celebration, that you made a very specific address calling for the end of the party system. Now, this has been quite a year. We've seen the revelations around the NSA program, which has drawn support from both sides of the aisle in opposing this violation of the Constitution. We're seeing both parties, members of both parties, coming out in opposition to Obama's attempt to do the Syria operation. we have two bills, a bill in the House, a bill in the Senate for the reinstatement of Glass-Steagall, both of which are bipartisan efforts. So now 1 year later since you made that address calling for the end of the party system, and with the more clear looming collapse of the current system, and what we're putting on the table with Glass-Steagall, credit, the NWAPA 21 program, this entire fusion-driven Pacific orientation, what do you see as the future of politics in America now?
Well, first of all, we've come to a very critical situation. The planet as a whole is in desperation. Now, the nature of the desperation varies with parts of the planet you're talking about. For example, China has got a bad perspective right now under the present world market. But China is not in terrible condition as Europe is or as the United States is and so forth. It doesn't have that degree of problem. But China has a clear problem coming up down the line and not so distant down the line. So therefore, if we simply get a credit system approach among nations by our restricting credit to things that are credit worthy, we can use credit, a credit system controlled by governments. We can use that as a way of financing promises to pay them back, pay this thing back. We can do that. We can do that policy. I think at this point you will find that China's concerned about his policy, so therefore I think China would cooperate with that policy. Japan, it knows it's got a similar kind of problem, different but similar, and so forth. India is in terrible conditions, threatened conditions. Most of the world is in threatened conditions. Africa is in impossible conditions. Europe is bankrupt, and the United States is virtually bankrupt, to say nothing of what's going down in South America. So the point is, you reach the point that you have no option, no guarantees, unless you have the right program. And you cannot go into a hyperinflationary program. You can use credit, but the credit has to be tied to this process. And that is what I understand clearly. This is my specialty. And I can say that in principle, what I'm talking about will work, in principle, if the effort behind it is adequate. And the effort means the commitment of people to see that this thing is put through. In other words, if the people sit on their hands and say, we don't want any of this, then we're finished. Everybody's finished. But if the people say, we go along with this, guarantee, as Roosevelt did, you've got to guarantee to people who have no employment, no conditions of life suitable, you've got to guarantee something to them. And they've got to see it over the future, not just today. They don't want to be bought. If you're going to torture us, kill us off, but don't torture us. You're going to make a promise, keep the promise. You've got to restore confidence of the people in the United States. And the people no longer have confidence in the United States because the governments we've had recently aren't fit to govern. I mean, George W. Bush. And look what they did. This is really ugly. Take 9/11. 9/11, we know we don't have the proof that we need. The current president has the proof in his possession, and he won't let us use it. There is a bill which was drafted which would expose the truth about 9/11. I know, and other people know, what the elements of that are. We know what's practical in that sense. We don't have possession of the right to control that. But we know that the 9/11 operation, an attack on the United States in 2001, that attack was orchestrated by the British monarchy, the British organization called the BOE, which is the military production organization, and the Saudi Arabia. And these institutions broke calls for 9/11. Now, the 9/11 thing, if the facts come out, you will convict Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the keystone of this operation. The backstop of it is the British Empire. The middleman is the BOE, producing the equipment for things. We know that two pilots who were flying into the 9/11 location, into the towers, they were the ones hired and directed and sponsored by the head of, the present head of Saudi Arabia, and they're the ones who did the job. And all you have to do is get Obama to confess up, withdraw his block against exposing these facts, which exist, are known to exist, but it's unlawful for people to know it, to go out and say what they know. But if we present what they know, what we know, in a sense, but what they know also, if we present that, this guy is thrown out of office. The two presidencies, the George W. Bush and Obama, are both thrown into the jug. They're both criminals. Because they did this, they organized. They are the culprits who participated in the organization of 9/11 against the United States on behalf of the Saudi kingdom, on behalf of the British monarchy. Those were the guilty ones. They did it. They're still doing the same kind of thing today. And we have to have the guts to take what we know and get some guts and people in the Congress and so forth who have the guts to do it and force this thing through. We want a complete exposure of who actually did what's called 9/11. We can no longer tolerate this lie, which the presidents of the United States have done. Both of these presidents, George W. Bush and Obama, both have lied. They covered up the story. The facts were there. The facts were available. And that's what it's coming to. That's where we are. If the United States wants to survive, it's got to regain its honor. The United States did not, or some poor people abroad did not cause 9/11. The 9/11 was organized under the British monarchy and by the Saudi kingdom. Those are the people who did it. They're the ones who killed. They're the ones who paid for it. And the time has come for that to be told. I think once that were told, you would find immediately a cleaning up of the institutions of the United States and some other nations. And we would get to the truth of what's happening in Syria. We're not getting the truth from this president. This president is lying. He's lying about Saudi Arabia. He's lying about Syria. And he keeps lying. He drops his lies off and then tries to cover them up afterward. So we're at a point like this where the political system has to come to grips with reality. And those who did 9/11 are still criminals. Those interests, the Saudi kingdom is evil. The British monarchy is evil. These are the people who organized and covered up for the operation in 9/11. And that little thing lingering around here over these past years explains to the American people exactly what went wrong and explains exactly what is wrong and also implies what has to be done about it.
Well, you've certainly delivered a strong message to us tonight, Lynn. Thank you. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us, and I think I'd be sharing the sentiments of many of our viewers and wishing you a very happy birthday this weekend, and hoping for a good many more. Thanks for watching. Good night.